Hello, everybody, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. I'm the Director of Communications here at PFLAG National. Well, here at PFLAG National being relative, but isn't all time and space relative right now. As usual, I'd like to introduce my good friend and colleague, also in relative time and space, Jean Marie Navetta.
It's really bad when you start the show giggling. Yes, hello, Liz. It's so good to see you. Hello from Palm Springs. Thank you so much, Liz, and everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. We are back to have another conversation as we continue to finally reverse isolation using news articles. So this week we're actually talking about students and state schools and what students are experiencing as they have to shelter in place, and so many of them are actually taking their classes online, which means they don't necessarily have access to many of the resources, including GSAs that they typically are that are typically available to them. So to do that, I'm going to bring in two of my colleagues. I'd like to bring in Jamie Curtis and Sean Connors, and we are going to talk about schools and students. Hello, my friends.
Hey, great to see you.
It's great to see you again after many Zoom meetings, I'm sure.
No, it's been an hour maybe.
It has. We can't get enough of each other at PFLAG. We just keep seeing each other over and over. So for everybody who wants to read the article, it actually is a really fascinating piece. And I think there's some interesting stuff we can talk about. It is available at straightforequality.org/discussion series. The article today is entitled Coronavirus Isolated LGBTQ Students from Community. Now they're going back to school. And it was in the Tampa Bay Times by Christopher Spada. So I want to get started with the conversation because the whole article is about these different student experiences. And that's something certainly that everyone is speaking about. But this really zeroes in on the experiences of students who happen to be LGBTQ identified and what this isolation has actually looked like for them. So Sean and Jamie, let's start with the first question. And I think I know that you probably have considered this, but have you considered specifically what some of these challenges for LGBTQ students who are going back to school in these very different ways look like? And are there other issues related to this conversation that aren't mentioned in this article that we should be talking about? And actually, Sean, I'm going to start with you if that's okay, because I love putting people on the spot. And that's fun when you have three introverts doing a show together.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely considered all the things that were mentioned in the article. And I wasn't surprised by any of them. One of the things that I think the article didn't necessarily touch on that we have to be thinking about when we're talking about students distance learning now is that virtual learning spaces often use people's legal names. And so it's even another layer of inaccessibility to trans students. So thinking about that and how it impacts somebody on a day-to-day basis, if I were on a video chat and all I saw was like my dead name, how would that impact my ability to learn effectively?
Yeah. Can I ask you, have you heard about any districts or anybody who has sort of policy around how they're handling this, or are we sort of, figuring out our whole new world?
I know that in higher education, some of the platforms that folks use, it's as easy as messing with their database in a way that they can put in whatever preferred name or chosen name that someone has. But on platforms like Google Classroom, it's far more difficult, which I know a lot of folks are using now in their sort of day-to-day education lives. And I don't think there is a way to fix it without changing their entire database of students.
Wow. Probably something that wasn't even considered in the creation of those spaces, and yet suddenly becomes an urgent issue. Thank you. That wasn't even on my radar, which is precisely why we do this. Jamie, what about you? What came up while you were reading?
Well, a few things. I mean, I think, a lot of people are dealing with anxiety right now. A lot of us, that is something that's happening in the world. And for students going back to school, for some of them, school can be a really safe space where they're supported, but maybe they're not at home. Or school can be the place where they're bullied and they maybe get more support at home or don't. And so there can be a lot of anxiety for LGBTQ plus students anyway, in schools and going to school. And now we've added, the world falling apart around us on top of that existing anxiety. So I just wanted to mention and acknowledge how big of a weight that is on a lot of people's shoulders, even if they are comfortable at school. So, I was thinking about that. I mean, the other thing that I've been hearing some about with students going back to school, particularly virtually, is issues around privacy and what that means if students are virtual and in their homes, as all three of us are, and people who we maybe wouldn't have welcomed into our own space, our private homes, are now in them and are now seeing them. And what does that mean for any student who maybe doesn't want to show their home, or students who don't have a home to show? What does that mean? And what does that mean for LGBT youth who are now like, this maybe home is a sanctuary, but they have to take down symbols, or maybe they wish they could have, maybe they're out at school and they wish they could have symbols in the background, but they can't now. So just the issues around privacy and being in our homes is very personal anyway. And students are now navigating this. And those lines between school and home have changed. And so I think that's a huge thing. And the other thing is whether students are going back now virtually or they're going back in person, whichever your school district is doing, it's anybody's guess how long that lasts.
Yeah.
So I think that's another level to the anxiety that students are facing, that, okay, so if they're starting virtually, maybe the hope is that in a couple months they'll go back in person. So that'll be another change and another transition, or vice versa. Maybe they're starting in school, but they're worried that they're going to have to be going home. So all of those are anxiety points for anyone. And then when you add any sort of additional thing on top of that, or any sort of stress point, it gets even harder.
And I think that's a really important observation. I was actually listening to a lecture this week, and somebody was talking about how we have normalized the not normal because of how we've had to live. And in sort of normalizing this, because no one knew how long this was going to go on. We don't know how long it's going to go on. And in doing that, we've done what we need to do to get by. And yet there is this need to keep reminding ourselves that we are functioning under really not good circumstances that are actually really stoking the flames of people's anxiety and depression and just general concerns. And I think when you start layering that on top of concerns about identity, that's really important. I remember reading research from the Human Rights Campaign talking about where youth are out. And it was, most often out to friends at school, then out to some personnel, and then it was to family in a declining number. And I thought, as I read this article, that creates a lot of pressure for kids.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the services that are available. So this article mentions the LGBT National Help Center, the Metro Inclusive Health, the Trevor Project. So what I was wondering about is we've definitely seen all of these organizations saying that they are seeing spikes in the requests for help. How do you think this is starting to show up for organizations like here at PFLAG? What do you think we are, what kind of things are we doing? What do you see our chapters doing? And what kind of services do you think are necessary? So Sean, where are the gaps? Like, where do we really need to be providing some help?
I think that there are a lot of great resources available for young people right now. And I don't necessarily think that traditional ways of accessing them are available to folks. So college, for example, most colleges have a gender and sexuality center. That's obviously not accessible now if they're not in person. But thinking about how we can meet those gaps with family members who, might overhear, hey, you're in a women's studies class. What does that mean? I have these stereotypes about this. Or even access to extracurricular activities such as a GSA are probably totally lacking, because I don't think we've sort of had this time where educators have had to go back to basics instead of stepping up to include the things that might be extra to them, but really are like the linchpin of what students need for their identity formation.
Yes. It's interesting. As I was reading this article, I ended up jumping onto GLSEN's website and reading a little bit more statistics about GSAs, because one of those limitations that's even mentioned here is that GSAs don't get to exist, or they don't get to exist in the form that we or that students traditionally know. And what we know is that when schools have GSAs, students are less likely to hear homophobic and transphobic comments. They are more likely to feel safe. And they actually know that in schools where GSAs exist, faculty and personnel are more likely to respond to situations that need some help and some intervention. And now that structure is completely removed, I have to imagine that for some students, that must be really frightening. So Jamie, what do you think about resources? What is out there? What are you seeing people doing? I mean, what are we also seeing maybe in the chapter network too? Because I know a lot of chapters went online. So how can people, how is this looking for people?
So I think there's a lot of groups that have gone online. I mean, certainly PFLAG Connects is something that we have brought online and is our program that we didn't think things were possible to do if we weren't in person just a few months. And oh, how we have learned that they are in fact possible. But I think a lot of people are moving in that direction. And I think to Sean's point, we also have to keep in mind that the educators and the administrators are learning as they go as well, just as we did when we set up PFLAG Connects. And I have many educators in my life, whether it's people that are in their first few years of teaching or have done it for decades, and they're all freaked out about this year. So they're freaked out about the basics of teaching and supporting their students. And so I don't know that they're at a place where they've even expanded yet to think about, okay, now how do we take our GSA online? Because to your point, Jean Marie, that is a place where we know statistically youth do better if there's a GSA in their school. But unfortunately, is it seen as an extra right now? And I think that's a place where when we move into talking about how to support youth as adults in these spaces, helping GSAs get up online and providing these services, and even some, other organizations and supporting and providing Zoom accounts or providing tools. When we started with PFLAG Connects in April, there were a few things out there about how to do virtual online support. If you Google it today, there's a lot more out there. And so hopefully more and more groups will be moving in that direction and providing that. And I'm glad to see that there are so many resources. And I know Trevor, their hotlines, and also now they have a text line, which I think is so smart and so great, not only because that's what people prefer and how they prefer to communicate, but also for privacy. Sometimes it's easier to not have to worry about lowering your voice than it is to sort of text on your phone. So I'm glad to see those resources are there, and it's not surprising they're having more people reach out. I think, as we're all seeing, there's a need for connection from everyone. That's the best situation. And then at the worst, there's a lot of isolation and loneliness. So, providing those points where people can check in, and some of that could be through those group meetings, or it can also be reaching out sort of one-on-one to make those connections.
Yeah, I agree. I kept thinking as I was thinking about GSAs, I thought for many students, that is their only safe space, literally the only safe space that they have at school or at home. And having that taken away must be nothing short of actually terrifying. And it's interesting. I was actually listening to a talk yesterday by Sam Brinton, who's a vice president of policy over at Trevor Project. And one of the comments that they made was that not only have they seen a double in the volume of calls for help that they've been getting since the pandemic started, but they used a phrase that I wrote it down, it stuck with me, and it said, and they said that many, in these situations, many students, many young people are actually trapped with their risk factors. And when I started to think about that phrase, it got me in a way that it just terrified me, because when you think about, there's this isolation, there's this fear and anxiety, and then to be trapped with the people maybe who are in fact causing you such trauma, it just absolutely broke my heart. So I want to talk about what we do about it. We are nothing at PFLAG if not focused on doing things. So what do you think people should be doing? And Sean?
I have a lot. I have a whole lot. I think on a really basic level, like adults in general, family members and educators can support their students by bringing up the issues of diversity and inclusion with school boards, with school administrators, if they're a parent who's supporting a student who's distance learning or they've chosen to homeschool, seeking out lesson plans or other resources to supplement that learning that includes inclusive resources like books and movies and all those sorts of things. But I also think for educators, it's important to flag virtually in their space, to sort of let folks know that they are welcoming in their space. I have a trans flag behind me in my little flower pot. I have my coffee mug, like simple, easy things that you could just say, I'm a safe person to talk to. You might disclose to me in chat, and that's okay. Or including pronouns like we do too in our names is something that's helpful as well.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking about the curriculum piece. I read a statistic that I think it was GLSEN's last climate survey. They found that 19% of the students who had done the survey said that they did have positive examples of people who are LGBTQ somewhere in their school curriculum. But 18% of respondents said that any examples of LGBTQ people in their school curriculum were negative. Which really made me think about that, that piece of the everyday of what you're learning is an opportunity to insert a chance to talk about inclusion. And yet, unless that's happening, I think it's only 4 states actually mandate it right now. It's not often going to naturally happen. Jamie, what stuff were you thinking about when it came to solutions or ways that people can help? Because I don't think there's just one solution to this.
Yeah, and there's one thing I wanted to bring up. You were talking about how home is not always a safe space for LGBT youth. But I also have known some over the years that have had really accepting families where home is the safe space and the hallway at school is the really unsafe space. Yeah. And so, for those students, it's a different dynamic as well. And so I just wanted to raise up that, people are having all sorts of different experiences. For some, they feel like they're finally able to focus on the learning because they don't have to worry about what's going to happen in between class or what somebody's going to say, which is a whole other problem. But it's a different dynamic that, maybe for some youth, being virtual or in front of a computer is going to be a positive in some ways for them. So I just wanted to mention that. As far as resources, definitely agree with Sean about visible symbols. I think checking in with people, particularly if there are youth, that it's a GSA advisor or an adult has talked to or worked with in the past, doing individual outreach, seeing how people are doing, sharing resources, and sharing them multiple times. So if you reach out to a youth and they seem like they're depressed, letting them know what some of the resources are, whether that's Trevor or GLSEN, and then reaching out again and sharing those resources again. So, sometimes we're not receptive to something the first time we hear it, and it takes a little time for us to be ready. So I think that's a good idea. I also think it's good to acknowledge what people are feeling and what they're going through. As I said, a lot of people are dealing with anxiety and it can feel like you're the only one going through it. And I think it's important to acknowledge whatever the young person is feeling. It's okay. It's okay to feel that way. And, and talking through that. I also think that we don't talk about self-care a lot with high school students, or we didn't when I was a high school student, which was obviously very recently. But, I think that is a conversation that's really just come up in the last few years. And I think this is a time to begin that conversation with younger and younger people, because self-care is so important right now. And, I would say, even really young kids are doing things to take care of themselves that they're not thinking of, whether it's, we were joking about how we all love to read, whether it's their time reading or their time coloring, and talking through with high school and college students, how to take care of themselves and how to really step back and think about what are the activities in my life that refuel me and recharge me so that I can go on, and really talking and starting those conversations about self-care, because this is a time where young people could be learning those skills because they are going through something unlike what any of us have been through before. And so there is an opportunity to learn the skill of how to take care of yourself during this time.
I really appreciate that you mentioned that. And I think it keeps coming back to sort of modeling how to do self-care too. That, as adults, if we can show healthy examples of self-care to younger people, and I really did love the checking in with people. I think the longer this goes on, the harder I personally find it sometimes to keep up with, even with my text messages. And yet I honestly have to say that every single time I can get through the whole batch and respond, I'm happy that I did it. I mean, these little check-in things are so important. And I think these little symbols and these little ways of signaling are so important. If you've ever been somebody who's been looking for an ally, you desperately look in everything around people, looking for some sort of sign that they're with you. And, to Sean's point, the coffee cup could be the thing that really makes somebody's day. I just think keeping things available. I also would encourage parents and administrators and teachers and everybody to look into in your districts what the policies on bullying are, and see if your district has a policy on cyberbullying, because this is something that is likely to become a larger issue as we exist more in a virtual space. And it really had me thinking about the gaps in our policies, and that so many of them don't specifically address that. And I think that's something we probably need to be looking at. I am seeing a ton of comments and questions on the side, so I'm going to ask if Liz can come back in and pass along a few of the questions or the comments that we have. There's been a lot going on, and I don't multitask. I'm terrible.
Sure. It's okay. I am here to do it for you. So yeah, there's been a lot of comments, and there was one, it was literally the very first comment we got from someone who found this article difficult to read. And at first I thought difficult, was it hard to reach? But I think it was emotionally difficult to read, I think, and I get that. So the question about as a community member and youth ally, how can we best support youth in the community during this time? Which I think is a great question.
I think we talked about some of the checking in things, but Jamie and Sean, do you have any other sort of more general check-in ways, things that matter with youth, or things that you think are important that we might be missing?
I think a couple things. If you know of any youth, again, specifically check in with them, see how they're doing. Also ask what they need, what they're hearing other people need, and trying to assess what's there. If you know educators or people who work in schools, reaching out to them, leading with love, because they're going through a stressful time right now, and understanding that this is a tough situation for them, but asking what they need help with to support youth, and giving them some of the suggestions we talked about here of how they can easily be a support to youth without it feeling like another thing is being added to their plates.
I love that. I love the asking what you need, because sometimes we sort of do function as our own authorities.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. And I know that counselors are very much on overload right now. I often come back to one that I know well. Our PFLAG, I live in Burbank, California. Our PFLAG Burbank chapter was founded by some former school board members. And the president of that chapter is actually the counselor at I have 15-year-old twins, for those who don't know. And he is the counselor at the middle school that they went to. So he's the chapter of the PFLAG president. He's also an intervention specialist at a local public school. He's openly gay, and he founded the GSA at the middle school. And I see him out there on social media constantly just throwing stuff, and I think he's being really just so proactive, because he's had that interaction with students. He knows the challenges they have faced, and having been in it with them in person, really, I think has given him such great perspective. And I also, the thing to Jamie's point, I see a lot of parents reaching back out to him to saying, how can we help you do this? Not, I want to speak to the, the manager of Counseling Barn, actually wanting to help and make it a positive situation. We have a comment here sort of that goes to this point, right? The idea of that their biggest worry is that kids at risk of harm with schools being remote, and how to manage innovation, especially to meet, people who don't have access to resources, for high-risk families, or people who don't have homes, to Jamie's point. A lot of homeless kids also in this situation right now.
And we know a significant portion of homeless youth are LGBTQ identified. So when we talk about truly falling through the safety net, I mean, we are right at the crux of that. And I think that's important. And also recognizing, to the point that we kind of started with Jamie talking about people giving access to their spaces, we're making an assumption that people have spaces. We're making an assumption that people have technology. This whole conversation is sort of predicated on the privilege of those things. which are by no means a given for everybody. And I think the fact that those things don't exist actually needs to be a conversation, because I don't think enough people realize how many people are in fact at risk.
Yeah, and I think to Laura's point, another plug I would put in is, if you're able to, reaching out to your local schools or school district, and also other organizations that are serving youth, to give what you can or help them in any way that you can. I know there have been a few organizations here in DC that, usually work to get backpacks for kids, are now working to get laptops for kids. That's a lot more expensive. So what you can give or contribute, or whether it's to food pantries or organizations that are providing food to families, all of those places, because to Laura's point, school can be a safe checkpoint for those people that need it. And without this, it really is scary to think about the kids falling through the cracks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also think we shouldn't, there are also a lot of kids who are in a lot of fear around returning to school in person. Yeah. And what that means, having to deal with their issues of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and COVID-19, where they're not necessarily feeling the protection from trusted adults. I've heard a few kids in my orb here, friends of my own kids saying, who do we trust? What a scary place to be.
But, I think the fact that this conversation is happening, that people are actually starting to unearth these issues, that during the course of the last 30 minutes, all of us have had this, I didn't think of that kind of moment. I think that the more that we do this, the more it opens those doors, the more it identifies opportunities for some of us to volunteer or to share our talents, share our time. And I think that sometimes just having this conversation so people realize what's necessary, so maybe they are reaching out to a school district and saying, hey, listen, I got a lot of tech skills. I'm willing to help with this. Can I do something? That might actually be how we create some solutions.
And I think to that point, Jean Marie, we're having this conversation and learning things from each other kind of in the abstract. Imagine if you sat down on Zoom with 3 other people you knew in your community and said, what have you heard? What have you heard? What do people need? And really started together to talk through this with the specifics of your area and your school district. Just having these conversations and saying, okay, Jean Marie's going to call this person afterwards to find out more information. Liz is going to do this. Just having these discussions, ideas come up, and that's where so much of the organizing can happen.
I agree.
I realize we only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to bring in a positive comment from an educator we have here. Dave's experience as an out teacher who got zero negativity from students, quite the opposite, but recognizing that there is also this pressure that kids are feeling, right? What are their parents going to think? What are their friends going to think? And welcoming them into, personal space. What does their personal space say about them?
Yeah. And I think, again, to Sean's point, what you have around you when people see you online is kind of important. Like, we've all spent endless hours analyzing bookshelves behind people. Let's just face it, we've all done it. Or wondered, why did you buy that artwork? I don't understand that. Why would someone do that? Or that's just me. But having something supportive, even if it's completely innocuous, because it's the person who needs to see it that's going to see it. And so sometimes those very silent marks of support are important.
Yeah, it's funny. I shared something very innocuous on my Facebook page, right? When the day my kids were starting school, just, hey, educators, you could just put a sticker in the background, and the person, it had 125 shares in 10 minutes. And I thought, it seems like such a little thing, but I guess it's only a little thing if you know about it.
Yeah. That's how we change the world. It's these little things. Well, we are almost at time, which means I need to get us wrapped up, and I get to tell everybody about next week. So Sean, thank you for doing 2 weeks in a row with me. I know I was really kind of a pain in asking you, but thank you. Jamie, thank you as always for coming on and making me look smart. And Liz, thank you so much for keeping everything running. So I want to quickly share a couple of things with people. I actually have notes for myself today. So the first thing is that you definitely want to be with us next week for something to talk about, because it is going to be a unique show. We've never done anything like this. We are going to be focusing on getting out the vote. And it's not just going to be me plus a couple of guests. We are going to have the entire PFLAG staff joining us to talk about their vote plans and how they plan on voting, and to get you really excited. We're going to be talking about some great resources that we have, that if you're somebody who really cares about this election, and you should be somebody who cares about this election, how you could be more effective in ensuring that everybody gets a vote and everybody gets access to the vote, and that we are all doing this fairly, because democracy matters, as do facts. So I want to thank everybody once again for joining us. Thank you for being with us. If you want to learn more about PFLAG, please visit us at pflag.org. And as we wrap up every single week the same way, we want you to run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. And please wear your masks. My name is Jean Marie Navetta, and we will be back next Thursday with something to talk about live. Thank you.